Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Capital Consumption Theory. I'm here with Brian Winters, and today we're talking about inflation. Again, I think Brian, um, you enjoyed the last conversation, and then it sounded like you've been finding other news and data and discussion relevant to it.
I did, because I inflation has been something that's been on my radar for, I guess literally decades.
Yeah,
And I've always associated with, money printing and things like that as driving inflation. And
yeah,
so when you showed those charts from Argentina,
yeah,
showing how they were having, severe inflation, but at the same time their capacity utilization was falling.
yeah.
Um, that was really insightful.
That was an
And
eye
so
opener. Yeah. I was surprised by that also. Yeah.
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 Um, and so I've been thinking about that. What does that mean when businesses are purposely producing less because it means higher profits? And I
Yeah.
started seeing, it's like one of those things like when you hear a new word and then you notice it everywhere,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I've been
Yeah.
thinking about this for the last couple weeks, more than a couple because we took Christmas off.
Yeah.
But so some similar examples and things that I thought of was like housing. When we
Yeah.
build new construction, we don't try and maximize the capacity utilization of the land and
Yeah.
and house as many people as possible. They build like luxury high-end apartments to
Yeah.
maximize their revenue.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and,
Um,
and so and it has the same source, which is lower income people are less likely, maybe are less stable tenants, and so they can make more money by just ignoring that section of the market and focusing on a higher
yeah.
clientele.
Yeah. So from the general case, the idea seems to be, that when you have more inequality and aggregate demand is steeper, businesses are always trying to maximize revenue. And if aggregate demand gets steeper, then businesses will tend to start to find that raising their prices actually maximizes their revenues and it maximizes their profits even to a larger degree. Um, because if revenue goes up 10%, profits, a lot of times net margins maybe 10% in the first place. And if you manage to increase revenue 10% on top of that, sometimes that'll like double your revenue. So being able to raise prices is a big thing for businesses, if they have room at all to do that without having volume go way down. And so the more inequality you have, then definitely I think the more um, businesses will do that. And there, anecdotally, you do hear from Warren Buffett and some other guy whose name I never remember that businesses are saying this. They're saying, we've got lots of unused capacity, but we're finding that it's more profitable to raise our prices rather than try to get that capacity online.
And so there are some business models that do this on purpose, like where they produce high-end luxury goods, where they
Yeah,
specifically their artificial scarcity is where a
yeah,
lot of the value is derived
yeah,
from. And I guess
yeah,
so as I thought about this more, I was thinking of diamonds, right?
yeah,
You could
yeah,
produce a heck of a lot more diamonds, but
yeah,
by keeping it rare and marketing it to people as, this is how you show someone you love them, 2 months salary on a little rock.
yeah.
Um, they've maximized their profits while reducing their output.
Yeah, diamonds are a fascinating example. I mean, you may know that we've been able to, I was reading, I think 20 years ago how we were starting to be able to produce artificial diamonds. And my understanding is that is actually quite mature now. They can get artificial diamonds, that are pretty much indistinguishable, except maybe under a microscope, from natural diamonds. But the industry has surprisingly been able to be successful, at keeping some type of distinction between the artificial ones and the natural ones. The natural ones have this very limited supply, and they
But
have, they
but the
have that,
natural ones don't,
that
right?
concept.
I mean, it's not a very limited supply. It's an artificially constrained supply.
Well, the natural supply, it may also be somewhat constrained, but it is definitely, I mean, it's definitely more constrained, um, than the artificial one. Like the artificial one, like I understand that
Yeah.
the cost to make them is actually quite cheap.
Yeah.
And if the narrative of society, like if everybody like decided, wait a second, these are the exact same things, why not buy the artificial one for like 90% cheaper? If everybody decided that, the price of diamonds would just completely collapse.
Yeah.
Like
Don't they
it's
call
funny,
them like,
it's
well,
actually there, and it's surprising that
but
they're
but that,
managed
I mean,
to
it
do
should, right?
that.
If
Yeah,
there's a cheaper alternative that is
yeah,
functionally the same thing, it should collapse the market.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
it's funny. I mean, people are funny, demands are funny, and they have. I mean, you can sort of
But I
understand.
mean, but it's not the people that are funny. It's the marketing that has persuaded people that it's only the natural diamonds that come from the ground are how you should spend lots of money to,
Yeah.
put in jewelry.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny that the people are persuadable by marketing. I mean, there's like a Big Bang Theory episode where like Penny finds out that the diamond that Leonard gave her was like repurposed from a diamond drill, and she's like, she's like, thanks a lot, how romantic, my used diamond drill on her finger, but
Yeah.
I
So
mean, marketing works like that. I mean, a lot of times, I think a lot of decisions, people, how occupied people's bandwidth is, and that I think that's people how they naturally work. Like they tend to focus on the things they focus on, and then there's just this entire universe of stuff out there that
so
most of it, the natural thing is to just filter it out and only understand it, 1 millimeter thick, and
so diamonds are a luxury,
it's
right?
different.
Their demand isn't driven by, in the same way that, essential things like food are. And so I guess another example that I was noticing was lawyer fees, lawyer services. And the
Yeah,
cost of legal services has increased at twice the rate of inflation for the last 35 years.
yeah,
They keep
yeah,
jacking up their prices.
yeah,
And if it price, because, big corporations and whatever still need legal services. There's sort of that inelastic demand. And if it prices out, the average person who may find themselves involved in the criminal justice system, for example, they can't
yeah,
afford a lawyer. Well, too bad. Lawyers' profits are still good.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, there's definitely places where, I mean, there's a lot of places where it's a complex system, and there's some places where business is competing is sort of is good for the customer. There's a lot of places where it works, and there's places where it doesn't work. And but again, yeah, I think the biggest you know misshapenness, the biggest distortion of the whole system is just the unequal income, and the fact that it has not been widely understood that you do have to get the income, you do have to provide income to the consumers. The even economists, the standard economic thinking, like what you read in an Econ 101 textbook, is the neoclassical synthesis. Is it the neoclassical synthesis? Did I say that right? So like Keynes came along, and he said, it turns out that you have to manage demand, that is not, the classical economists figured that everything just sort of just worked itself out in equilibrium, and that people would just demand and supply whatever they needed, and it was all is more or less optimal. And then Keynes come along and said, actually you need to manage demand. Sometimes you might not have enough demand, and as a result, like the factory, the economy has a downturn, and the paradox of thrift and stuff. And then the later synthesis or consensus became that in the short term, you have to manage demand, but in the long term, you don't have to manage demand, and there is an equilibrium. But the funny thing about it is that the general equilibrium models, to my understanding, like they were worked on, but they never, like the, I guess the, the whole holy grail of economics, you might say, is like connecting macroeconomics to microeconomics, like, connecting how do the individual firm decisions, how do they sort of scale up to a macro economy, and that has not been worked out very well. But we sort of are still um, working with that sort of it's basically, I want to say it's actually an assumption. Like I have not seen that they've actually proven that happens, and I would actually say that um, if you think about what it's supposed to mean, that aggregate supply and aggregate demand are supposed to equilibrate. The aggregate supply that you're talking about, on the one hand, you have the supply that companies actually bring to the market. And then on the other hand, you also have like potential supply, such as like, how much can the factories produce? And I feel like, what you should be looking at is how much can the factories produce? Like that is the relevant supply. So if you find that capacity utilization is coming down over time, and it's like now 70 something percent, and it's way below the capacity that you have, then I want to say that is more or less simply disproves the idea that the economy equilibrates in the long run. I mean, I think that as a piece of data tells you that that the economy does not equilibrate to to the full capacity of the economy. And so that's because there's not enough income at the bottom, and you do need to get enough income at the bottom.
So
And the whole thing is, the whole thing we've been talking about for years, for a couple of years now, a year or two now, is why that happens through the paradox of the worker consumer and stuff.
yeah. So with this type 2 inflation, how much is competition or lack thereof a driver of it? And could you address that inflation with increased competition? And
Yeah,
here's
there yeah, there's some sounds from the left, coming in saying that, this is all about monopolies. And I would actually be careful about going in that direction. I mean, I think that is certainly uh I think that's certainly a factor to some degree, but I haven't seen any evidence saying that, say, monopoly pricing power has greatly increased in the last year. Like, I don't think the industry structures have completely changed in the last year, or anything like that. And I think
what
that,
about how about in the meat processing industry? Um,
yeah, I think
and so
there's been some consolidation, but I think that my feeling of it is that the driving factor, the really dominant factor, is still the shape of demand. Because even if you're a complete monopoly, um, but the demand curve is shaped by how much income people have and whether they can afford it or not. If you have a demand curve where 20% of the population can afford like almost anything, then as a monopolist, you're going to put the price, as high as you can, because, you can put it way up there because you're just going to get as much money as possible from that 20%. If, on the other hand, like, everybody can afford it, but, they're not going to pay, but, if it's too highly priced, then they'll be like, never mind, it's not that important.
but but if you have a number of businesses that are competing for that market share in the top 20%,
Yeah.
aren't some of them going to want to reduce their prices so they can reach the top 25% or the top 35%
Yeah.
and expand their market share that way?
Yeah. So, okay, so if you are a monopoly and the demand curve either looks like this, then you go like way up, or if it looks like flat, like the total, aggregate demand curve is flat, then you would actually go way out. You would keep the price where like everybody can afford it, so that as many people can buy it as much as they can. That maximizes your revenues and profits. Now, if you are, say, one of three firms that all offer this product, and everybody can um, can buy from either three, that changes your the firm's demand curve quite a bit. So if they like overprice their competitors by 20 or 30%, and in droves, everybody says, wait a second, the other guy's got the same thing, we're just going to buy from them. So that maybe the total aggregate demand curve looks like that for that product, but the firm's aggregate demand will be flatter, because if you're priced too high, then some of that demand will just run over to the other. There's a substitution effect, like the other firms can substitute for you. So if you have perfect competition and there's like 1,000 firms, and it's apples, and nobody even knows who the heck made this, nobody even knows who you are. They just know they picked up an apple at the grocery store, and they don't even know that you were the grower. Then it's completely flat. Then it's a commodity market, and if you're like 3% higher than your competition, nobody buys from you. Like everybody, it's completely a flat demand curve. So that's sort of like the overview
Okay.
of how that works. So I don't think that inflation is well explained by by like saying it is because of monopolies. So I don't think that monopolies have increased, and I don't think that if you regulate it, like if you broke up all the monopolies, I don't think that would fix inflation. So that's why I think that the more dominant thing again is the income inequality itself. And to fix inflation, you should send out a UBI and fix the inequality. And then, when you do that, you will fix inflation. And then if there's other things that that monopolies are doing that are not good, and you got to regulate it, then regulate it. But I don't think that, those are strongly enough tied together to really justify like saying, oh, we've got too much inflation, we better go break up some monopolies now, because I don't
So,
think it fix the problem.
so there's an article I was reading this week, looking at
Yeah.
the meat processing industry,
Mm.
where their raw material is, like you say, is a commodity that, it's whatever. And
Yeah.
but anyways, so prices have been increasing because there's a bottleneck, and the
Yeah.
processors and suppliers have that extra um, leverage on the
Yeah.
prices. So the
Yeah.
suggestion was, well, what if the federal government bought one of the four processors that control the industry, and then
Is this the supplier that has a strong hand now, or is this the buyer? Is the processor the buyer that is facing rising costs?
no, this is the no, the suppliers are not facing rising costs. They are increasing their prices to consumers and
Okay,
pocketing
so
the difference.
the processors are increasing their prices,
Correct.
and they're managing to do that because there's a bit of a bottleneck on supply, and so they have they're able to.
Yeah, right. So if hypothetically the federal government bought Tyson Foods and took over that part of the business,
Yeah.
and then returned the profits to the treasury each year,
Yeah.
would that by setting a reasonable rate of increase in prices,
Yeah.
that would prevent or discourage the other firms from excessively raising their prices and
So
driving up inflation that way?
So my question would be like, where is the bottleneck coming from? And if the government took over Tyson, would they be able to increase quantity by a great deal in order to sort of fulfill the whole market, at the lower prices? If they can fix the bottleneck, then the prices come down. If they don't manage to fix the bottleneck, they might not come down.
So I was thinking about this from the historical perspective of the Tennessee Valley Authority, which
Yeah.
was back about in the 1930s, where the government dammed up rivers and such in the Tennessee
Yeah.
Valley,
Yeah.
huge infrastructure project, and then sold the electricity. And one
Yeah.
of the reasons that they continued to do that was so that they could make sure that electricity prices in the region, stayed
Yeah.
reasonable. They were sort of checking, what does it really cost to produce electricity, so that
Yeah.
anyone else who came along, they would have good
Yeah.
data to
Yeah.
compare.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, electricity is a classic natural monopoly where it takes a great deal of investment in infrastructure to in order to have it. So naturally, there's like sort of big economies of scale, and it's very hard to have like it would make no sense to have two grids. It only makes sense to have one grid.
Right.
Um, and so if that's owned by one company, then yeah, they'll have a monopoly, and they'll have a lot of pricing power. And it's a service. It does make sense to for the government to provide it, and just keep the prices sort of very reasonable.
Yeah. So one of the other examples that caught my attention this week was the price of like academic textbooks, or things that are very, very specialized, where
Yeah.
a textbook, the book might cost,
Yeah.
$150 or something
Yeah. Yeah.
ridiculous, because
Yeah.
they can.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, but if they wanted to sell lots and lots of them, then they would bring the prices down.
I actually think that um it's I actually think that it all comes back again to the distorted economy, because like it's funny that I think everything has to do with UBI, and it's not because I'm trying to like sell UBI or something. It's just
You should
because
be trying to sell UBI. It's a good solution to sell.
yeah, but like completely honestly, in good faith, I actually do
Yeah.
think that it does come back to this distorted economy again, because one of the things that happens when your consumer does not have enough income is that demand becomes very scarce, and so when demand is very scarce, um, marketing becomes very valuable. Like every business, and especially the small businesses, when you're being an entrepreneur and you're trying to innovate a new product for people to buy, the hardest part of entrepreneurship is not building the product. The hardest part is like getting it out there, getting anyone to pay attention, because everybody is just completely you know bombarded by advertising from everywhere. And then so you have to, like, people, they don't look at their texts, they don't answer their
Yeah.
phone,
This
and
is
you
why
have to say it back, but
small
none
YouTube
of them
channels
go.
struggle, right? Small
Yeah.
YouTube channels struggle to get their message out there because everyone's
Right.
bombarded.
But if everybody had enough income, um and you just had a good product, and people, and you just showed people, and people were like, I have plenty of income and I like this, so I'll buy it. And I think with enough income to the consumer, it would be much easier for products to get out, as long as they are good products. And if they don't have enough income, then it becomes like a large percentage of the economy becomes marketing. So that's why Facebook and Amazon and Google are the three of the largest companies in the economy. And that also creates a lot of sort of like economies of scale, and sort of like winner takes all effects. It's kind of like actors and actresses, where there may be like thousands and thousands who are like have the dream and are trying, and many of them are really quite good, but there's only space in everybody's head to like recognize and remember, oh, I know these 10, 20 actors or actresses,
Yeah.
and I like them, and I watch movies that have them.
Yeah.
Number 100, nobody remembers their name, so you go from you know you know you end up a multi-millionaire as Brad Pitt. But if you're
Yeah.
90% as good as Brad Pitt, then you're starving and waiting tables, and just moonlighting. Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the things I've observed as I've gotten older, Eddie, is that
Yeah.
I always used to wonder, like, why do they, why are these old stars still making movies? And now
Yeah.
as I'm older, I'm like, I may not know anyone in a movie except for some guy who was in something in the 90s, and
Yeah,
I had that connection with them.
yeah,
But my brain is too full to learn all the new actors and actresses and artists and everything else that
right,
he's
right.
throwing at us. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
So yeah, that I mean that makes it very much like that may be part of why brands are so important. I mean, brands are always going to be a little bit important, but
yes,
like I think when to the degree that marketing is super important, then brands also become super valuable. Like, if you
yeah.
everybody knows you.
I'm
Uh,
I'm reading Capitalism Without Capital, looking at intangible assets like that, like branding and
yeah,
stuff that you can't
yeah.
can't yeah. So
And I
anyways,
would say it's sort of a little bit like what Austin Mackel calls the beer can effect. Like, in order to build the business, you have to build all that marketing, and then you have to get lots of investment to be able to build that marketing. And there's like all this extra stuff that you have to do to get the business out there, way far and above and beyond just building a good product. And I think if people actually had enough money to spend, and money that the economy could support them spending, um, I think there would be a lot more innovation, a lot more entrepreneurship. Like I think people would be interested in building new and innovative things for um, for other people. But I think in this economy, it's very, very difficult. You have to either hit it big, or you're just going to be struggling quite hard.
yeah. All right. Good conversation tonight, Eddie.
All right, it was
Okay.
fun. Thanks everyone for listening. See you guys in 2 weeks. Capital Consumption Theory with Eddie and Brian.